So good afternoon, everyone. Let me first introduce myself. I'm Gaëtane Vernat, Director of the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery at Harbourfront Centre in Toronto. Before we start today's assembly, please join me in acknowledging the history, culture, and stewardship of the land of this region's Indigenous people, most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit, a Mississauga Ojibwe First Nation. We seek to live in respect, peace, and right relations with them as we live and work upon their traditional territory. So welcome everyone. For those who do not know, we are the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery is Canada's leading non-collecting public art gallery dedicated to presenting contemporary visual art from Canada and the world. Since 1987, the Power Plant has been on a mission to create an open culture and community for people to be face-to-face with thought-provoking contemporary art and ideas. We have a diverse audience whose lives and communities we seek to enrich through encouraging exploration of self and society. More than a gallery, the Power Plant is a community. It is a window into a diverse range of ideas and perspectives from artists, which will in turn inspire our audiences and provide unlimited personal discovery. We are so pleased to be online with all of you today and to steward this conversation between artist Ronnie Horn and writer Benjamin Moser. Today's program is co-presented with Toronto's International Festival of Authors, Canada's longest running literary festival. I'm pleased now to introduce its director, Roland Gulliver, to say a few words. Over to you, Roland.
Thank you, Gaëtane, and welcome to everybody, and welcome to my dining room where I have some late afternoon sunshine because I'm coming to you all the way from Scotland, as these nature of these pandemic times that we live in. And thank you again to the Power Plant for this partnership and to bring together this conversation and this kind of dynamic collaboration between artists and writers. As Gaëtane said, the Toronto International Festival of Authors is Canada's longest running and largest literary festival. This October, we will be from the 21st to the 31st of October, which will be the 42nd edition of the festival. It'll be my second as the festival director. And we'll be presenting over 200 events and activities. But we also have a year-round program of events and partnerships like the one you are taking part in today. So please do check out our website, thefestivalofauthors.ca, where you can see the latest events and activities, but also there are competitions. We did a poetry competition with the Power Plant last year that was really successful, hoping to do the same again. This year, there are also blogs around storytelling and art and different things that are happening. And also next week, we have two Norwegian writers to continue that perhaps that Nordic flavor to where we are today. But for TIFA, our aim is to inspire, empower, and connect through the art of stories, and importantly, highlighting how story manifests across many different art forms, from books to spoken word to film, and in today's case, in visual art. And also to explore how literature influences across art forms, how books and stories really define and drive artists who aren't always just writers. So having two renowned names today, like Ronnie and Benjamin, in conversation will be fascinating as we discover the connections that we'll know, but also that we will discover their shared understanding and their inspiration. So it's going to be a fascinating conversation. So thank you again to Gaëtane, and I'll hand you back to you.
Thank you, Roland. So just to put everyone in context, so I had the pleasure of meeting Ronnie Horn in December 2020, prior to this pandemic. And it was a great honor and a great pleasure for me. And we met as we were developing an exhibition together. And I'm so honored that in advance of this project that she accepted our invitation to be in conversation with Benjamin Moser. So when Joshua Human, our curator of education and public program, reached out to Benjamin a few months ago to invite him, his answer was an automatic yes. And he had always wanted to meet Ronnie Horn. So at the Power Plant, we love to make dreams come true. So for us, it was really such a great combination of two illustrious people, great minds, and creating an opportunity for us to listen to them talk together is so wonderful. So I would like first to introduce both Ronnie Horn and Benjamin Moser. So Ronnie Horn is an American artist. She lives and works in New York and Reykjavik. Using drawing, photography, installation, sculpture, and literature, Ronnie Horn's work consistently questions and generates uncertainty to thwart closure in her work, engaging with many different concerns and materials. Important across her oeuvre is her long-lasting interest in the Prothean nature of identity, meaning, and perception, as well as the notion of doubling issues which continue to propel all aspects of her practice. Ronnie Horn first visited Iceland in 1975 at the age of 19, and in 1984, Horn first incorporated words in her work. This merging resulted in the publication of Bluff Life in 1990, the first in a series of 10 books titled To Place, which focuses on Iceland and Horn's relationship to it. In discussing To Place, Horn has written that the entrance to all my work is the idea of an encyclopedia of identity. Horn's newest book, Island Zombie, Iceland Writing, December 2020, Princeton University Press, is described as follows. It vividly conveys Horn's experience from the deeply profound to the joyful and absurd, through powerful evocations of the changing weather and other natural phenomena, the violence of the wind, the often aggressive birds, the imposing influence of glacier, and the ubiquitous presence of water in all its variety. We come to understand the author's abiding need for Iceland, a place uniquely essential to Horn's creative and spiritual life. American writer Benjamin Moser, winner of 2020 Pulitzer Prize for the epic biography Sontag, Her Life and Work, 2019, is also the author of Why This World, a biography of Clarice Lispector, and he's the editor of the new translation of her work. For his work in bringing Lispector to international prominence, he was awarded Brazil's first state prize for cultural diplomacy. So before I invite Ronnie Horn and Benjamin Moser to speak to us, I would like to remind you that should you have any question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will devote the end of the conversation to answering some of the great questions that you will all undoubtedly have for our speakers. So now over to you, Ronnie and Benjamin, to begin this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hi, Ronnie. I can't see Ronnie yet. There you are. Hi, Ronnie.
Hey, Ben.
It's true what's been said. I've been aware of Ronnie and her work for years now, and I always figured we'd meet sometime. It just seemed like it would happen. And I didn't expect it to be in my kitchen on a computer. I kind of hoped, we'd actually get to see each other in real life, but it's a huge pleasure. Maybe I should just briefly say why I encountered you, which was through this book. This was, I don't know if people can really see it. You can see it. Called Rings of Lispector, and it was a show that Ronnie did in London in 2004. Is that right?
Something like that, yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to picture it even with the book, but like, here's an idea of this gallery room with Clarice Lispector's words on the floor in rubber, and from a book called Agua Viva, which means living water. And I thought it was so great because Clarice is such a, her her writing is so obviously trying to be music. It's trying to be painting. It's trying to be color. And so I thought it was just she would have just loved that an artist like you had taken that and actually paid her homage in that way. So anyway, and ever since then, you know, we're in touch very once in a while, but we've never met. So welcome and congratulations on your new book.
No, well, thank you. I should congratulate you on the Pulitzer.
Thank you.
You know, there's a question.
Yeah, I mean,
you couldn't have gotten it for Clarice as well.
Well, you know, I was really young. I mean, I started that book when I was, well, see, it's interesting that you were 19 when you first went to Iceland, because I was 19 when I first encountered her.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's funny, like some of these encounters when you're in college or when you're just starting out in the world, some of them are, including, you know, love, relationships, friendships, some of them kind of don't go anywhere. They seem really important. But your relationship to Iceland is similar. I mean, it's been maybe the most important place in your life. I mean, did you know that when you first, did you think, wow, boom, this is it?
I don't know that, but I knew that I would be coming back immediately once I went. And it became my muse, very much the way Clarice is yours. I feel like Iceland is something that has engaged me in a very mysterious and unnameable way that muses tend to do, you know, almost like could be a haunting, or it could be just a natural outgrowth of oneself, in a sense, being able to see the world in this very intimate way without compromising your own reality, you know? It's just more, in a sense. You know, going back to Clarice, I find, and her work has been very important to me as well, Ben, it's this, she sort of existed parallel in her language, which is feels empirical and metaphysical, and what she addresses it occurs on both levels simultaneously throughout her work. And I think for me that was a very strong connection right away. And then as I started to work on the Rings of the Spectre, you know, making this thick rubber floor, it was really kind of wanting to put you in a physical relationship. You could think of Clarice as the weather in this situation, you know. You have this very, very much of a physical relationship to the floor, which is embedded with her language. So.
And, you know, it's so interesting to me that she, you know, what I was saying about how she, you know, she's fundamentally a writer. I think most artists are fundamentally one thing. You know, like you could be a musician, but you can also paint, but basically you're a musician. You've been basically a visual artist, but you've also written quite a lot throughout your career. And when I was reading this, I was sort of jealous, actually, because I felt like, I don't know if I could be as free in my writing as you are, because I feel like, I don't know, like, do you feel like your visual art is more fraught or less fraught than your writing? Or is that
No, I think it's all very fraught, because, you know, everything's fraught, but.
Right.
In fact, if it's not fraud, I'm not going there, kind of thing.
It's never that good, is it?
Yeah, exactly. You know, for me, visual art is something that I was tagged with, being a visual artist. It wasn't, oh, I'm going to be a visual artist and this is it. It applies to my relationship to gender as well. I didn't choose either. It was chosen for me, kind of thing. And the problem is I don't have a strong connection to either. So I like to float, and I'm very comfortable with it. And the world has gotten more comfortable with it, which has been a nice thing, at least for me. But as far as my work goes, I've never really claimed an idiom and said, okay, I'm going to be a sculptor. I know people think of me as that, but that is not really so much my doing. I think as you start to work in something early on, you get tagged, and those tags are hard to shake. So
I feel the same way. I mean, I've always, even more restricted than just writing, I've written 2 biographies. So I've become a biographer, even though I don't really think of myself as that. And I don't want to do another biography, but I feel like that then becomes the expectation. I mean, do you think it's so funny, because I've only been to Iceland once, and I actually came from New York just on an Iceland Air flight, and I did the little thing where you could get like 4 days in a hotel for $39 or something. I just kind of wanted to set foot there. And it's really close to New York or London, depending what way you're coming from, but it's so far away. And I mean, do you think that Iceland is a kind of place where you can not be something that you might be expected to be, whether it's a gender or an art? I mean, you talk about floating, and so much of the book, I should show everybody the book if you haven't seen it. This is it, Island Zombie. It's funny that I noticed Gaetan stuttered a little bit when you said the title, because it says island and then Iceland, and you see both words at the same time, and you kind of start when you see it. But so much of this is about pools and about floating and about water. And, Rings of the Spectre is also a water metaphor. I mean, is that just a metaphor for you, or is that real? I mean, do you feel that need to physically float as a counterpart to your identity or to your art?
It's an interesting way to put it. Maybe that is. I think that's constitutional. That's who I am. That floating thing where you can be a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I mean, I've spoken about this notion of androgyny as a way of being inclusive, not exclusive. So for me, being androgynous is about having the best of all worlds. And if I had to choose a gender, I'd only have a subset of that possibility.
Mm. And as an artist, do you feel that, I mean, because I do feel that oppression, and I can imagine you've done so many different things. And, I've only rarely seen your work physically. I've just mainly read about it and seen it on the internet and stuff. But, your diversity is, I mean, is that fun or is that scary? Like, do you always, I said fraught before, but I mean, so often, wouldn't it just be easier to do the other biography or do the same thing you did last time, but make it a little different?
Ben, this is really a good question, because it is so true that once you kind of get into a signature style, you get into production, you can have all the assistance you want, you're going back to the same technique or subject, or not possible for me. Not possible. So I have my 1 or 2 assistants, and I keep going to different places. So either technical resources, material resources, or different idioms. I think it's a lot harder, not only in terms of production, but it's harder in terms of holding your audience. Because you're breaking expectations each time you step in with something, and it's almost like you have to start from zero again with the audience. But now that I've gotten such a history behind me, and with the good fortune of the younger generation questioning language as I grew up with it and had to kind of recalibrate my identity to reject it, I feel that there's a place for this floating space, creative space, that is not dictated by idioms or specifically forms, written, visual or musical, for example. I've never done any music. I have done some performance. I'm fascinated by performance and drawn to it personally. And I've managed a few monologues in my time. Suits me quite fine. I love to perform, but it's very rare that I've developed works that fit that format. So, you know, one of them was Saying Water, so it's more of this, you know, this floating, watery situation.
Yeah. And, you know, you said Liz Spector was the weather, which I love. I mean, it sounds like something I want to put on a poster or something. But
well, anybody with that level,
weather, you know,
complexity and subtlety, and in a way, it's a kind of visible invisibility, kind of, it's something like that, or an invisible visibility. She does that because you don't have so much of a visual on her, but she's everywhere when you're working with her. It's a very unique use of language.
Oh, she totally shapes your mind. She sculpts your head.
She does.
Yeah.
I've never read an author like her, and unfortunately, I've had a reader in English. But my dear friend Ellen Sixu was kind enough to review her texts of Agua Viva and translate the bits that I used for that sculpture.
Yeah.
Which were not, there weren't a lot of changes from the original translation, which I'm trying to remember the man's name. It was in a New Directions paperback. Who is that?
We've done them since, you know, we've redone them since that translation.
I've been wanting to read.
Who was the first person that did it? I can't remember. You know, they came out in little editions before, but we're publishing a new book next month by her called An Apprenticeship. And I actually think, I'm just going to go out there and say it, it's a terrible book. And it's probably her most popular book in Brazil because it's this kind of cheesy love story and it has all this stuff in it that's really great, but you can feel like she didn't really get it all together because she was doing it after this other work. And what I love about it is that she actually did have the courage to not do the same thing again. And she kind of fucked it up. And that sort of brings me closer to her because I feel like I'm always, do you feel like some of the times that you're experimenting, you're going off on to a tangent and then you just think, oof, no.
Yeah, there's a lot, you do a lot of work, but you know, I'm somebody who, you know, there's a lot of embarrassing shit, but I hope that I've kept most of it in the studio. I'm not 100% certain of that, but I do think there's a lot of risk taking in Clarice's work, although she may not have experienced it that way. I look at somebody like Francis Bacon, the painter, and I see how deeply fraught his work is with risk, every brushstroke really, and with different degrees of success in each painting, obviously, but in a way that many artists, they don't get close to that level of risk. You know, it probably requires an amazing strength, inner strength and constitution to just stand near the edge all the time, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it drives people mad, actually. I think it's very, I think physically, emotionally dangerous to take those kind of risks all that often. I think if you're not really an artist, it's hard to explain how vulnerable you become. So, I mean, just to bring it back to Iceland a little bit, do you feel like Iceland is a place that's kind of a constant in your life, even though it's such a volcanic? We had an eruption today, right?
We do, yep.
In Reykjavik or outside. And it's like, it's a place that at the same time is never the same because it's really, I mean, I've only been there once, but it's weird. You can see the earth happening.
Yeah, Iceland, you know,
but for you and your...
Yeah, this thing about Iceland being more of a verb than a noun is something that I've explored in this series To Place. It's very much about something that's becoming endlessly. And I don't think you can go there and imagine that this is a place like any other in the sense that New York City changes very, very quickly, but very differently. Iceland changes probably as quickly, but it's a geologic change, you know, versus.
Yeah, it's not like a new restaurant. Yeah.
Well, you could imagine that. You could in a way, because, you know, I've straddled both worlds, and you know, I am comfortable in a changing milieu, but at the same time, this idea that you go to a place that is this one thing, that has been, you know, kind of an illusion that I grew up with. Oh, I'm going to New York. Well, New York is not New York, is not New York, is not New York, endlessly not New York. You know, what it was in the 70s with all the you know, that was the beginning of the end of the jazz clubs and the beautiful intimate musical settings. And, you know, every phase I've spent in New York, it has a different, in a sense, identity. So this is true for me.
Right.
It's not a gross change, but it's a real one, and it's affecting one, very influential.
And in your life, the fact that you have had, I mean, the place has changed, but the place it might occupy in your soul is really consistent, because, I mean, in the book, you talk, I mean, I think it's, can I just say this about the book just for a minute? I don't want to embarrass you, but what's really so fascinating about the book is, first of all, how many different media you use, from writing to painting to other people's work to just all this stuff that you put in there. But it's also, you write something from 1978 and then it's next to something from 1998. And it's all mixed up in there, but it gives this very, for me, this really clear image of a relationship with a place, almost like a person. And so that's what I mean about consistent, not so much the place, but you know, I mean, can you compare it to a relationship with a person?
Iceland?
I mean, is Iceland like a person to you?
Well, you know, you know, there's a blurb on the back of the book by Jeanette Winterson where she talks about it as an erotic relationship. And I think that's quite accurate.
Oh.
I think there's a physicality and a sensuality to my relationship with Iceland that I've never thought even to share, but that is a reality, you know, in my time in Iceland, whether the weather or the vegetation or the erosion of the landscape, it all works together in this very profound way for me. So yeah, it is in that sense. And I think right now, for example, I haven't been there in a couple years, and I very, very much long to be there. The pandemic has kind of thwarted that a bit. And also, but I've been motivated especially by the situation in America, thinking, well, yeah, maybe it is time to think about another place to settle into. I have done that before with Iceland, but it didn't quite work. And I thought, well, I'm gonna get the president to give me a Bobby Fischer passport, which is the passport you individuals get when Iceland as a country decides, well, we need to have that person here. And they just do it. There's this informality. You know, the government is part of the people. It's not this thing hovering over you, waiting for you to make a mistake so they can grab you, or waiting for you to get to a certain age so they can, you know, nail you for something. So in that sense, Iceland is a place that's easy to be in, and it's very humane.
Did they give you the passport?
Not yet.
Did they give it? Not yet.
But they will. No.
That's so cool.
I don't have that.
I bet they will.
It's a joke that I'm putting out there, but we'll see what happens.
I think they should give it to you.
Well, you know, I've been getting 10% of the tourist income for the last 20 years of my life.
Oh.
You know that? No, that's a joke too.
That's great. I was going to ask you about that. So my mom, I thought this was so cool. I think when my mom was in college, she went on one of those Icelandair flights and she went to Iceland. And when I was a kid, I thought that was so cool and so exotic. And I'd never heard of anyone going to Iceland. And now I feel like everyone goes to Iceland. I mean, pre-pandemic and probably post-pandemic, it's this huge thing. And I almost feel like, even though, again, I spent like probably 4 days of my life there, I feel sort of protected of it. I mean, do you feel that like it's too much?
You mean the tourism or?
Yeah.
Well, you know, from 1975 to about 90, 91, 92, you didn't have any of that. It was not,
right.
You had no evidence of capitalism, just about. You barely had a road.
Yeah.
And in the 90s, they started to pave the roads and the cheap airlines started to come in. So that meant you had a different kind of tourism. It was all linked to the building of the roads because that gave people access to the countryside, which they hadn't really had easily. So it's become a very different place in my life in the sense that it's become more like the things I know. When in 2008, when they had this terrible economic implosion, they turned to tourism to pump up the economy, and they went very aggressively into mass tourism, which was something I personally oppose. I wrote about it as well. I never published that article, but it was kind of a long article about kind of enlightened tourism, you know, which is not, instead of this kind of mass tourism, which is almost like large groups of people who are very, very bored with life, trying to find something to connect to. I think that, you know, it's a very small percentage of people who, when they go to a place, they're there. When you see these buses full of tourists getting off, here's a funny incident, and this is where I'm coming from with the tourism. You know, I spent a lot of time photographing in Iceland, and at one point I was in a very kind of isolated part of Iceland. I had pulled over. It was a kind of a one-way road along a cliff, but there were these pullovers. So I was parked on the pullover, and I was photographing my camera on my tripod, and I was shooting out to the ocean horizon. There was a little fog on the ocean. And I wanted to shoot that. So meanwhile, a bus of tourists come along, pull in between the tripod and my car, literally, and they get off and they photograph this little fog on the horizon. So this is what I mean, you know, it's a kind of not a real contact with things. It's, you know, you're encouraging people to go places mainly because it feeds an economy. And, you know, being straight with that, it's a very destructive business. And it's certainly wearing Iceland out in its own way as well. So difficult. It's a difficult place in a way. You know, a lot of things have changed around Iceland that have made it less necessary for me. For example, global satellite positioning. Now, Iceland always, you know, you always had that, but you had a good, you know, it was never more accurate than a few yards even, right? Now they got you within a few inches and you can't get lost. You know, there was always this wonderful kind of threat risk of getting lost. And that was part of why I love to go there. Because flirting with that edge of disturbance has always been part of my habit. So that was one thing that kept me coming back and spending time on my own in various places. So, yeah.
Yeah, because, you know, that's true of cities too. Getting lost used to be really easy all over. Even in cities you knew, you could go to another neighborhood that you weren't so familiar with, and you were screwed until you figured it out. And you asked 10 people, and you did this. I guess there's not 10 people to ask in backwoods Iceland. I guess woods isn't the word for Iceland.
The best way to get lost in New York City is to get into a cab. a taxi.
Yeah, I mean, that'll do it every time. But like, it's true. I mean, do you think that, you know, you write this piece that I love about somebody else I love, which is about Emily Dickinson. And, you know, she has this answer, even though it's certainly before global positioning and all this, but of just retreating into the self, retreating into the private world and creating something that maybe no one's ever going to see. And just kind of opting out in a kind of monastic renunciation. I mean, do you think is that part of your attraction to Iceland, or am I just making that up?
Well, you know, the way I see Emily Dickinson is she stayed home so she could get at the world. There is a feeling like, you know,
Right.
you go out in the world and it kills off your imagination. You know, it tends to be what happens when you're in relationships with people. It tends to kill off your imagination. I always thought it was better not to live with anybody so I could have that inspiration, maintain that inspiration. That actually is Patricia Highsmith. I just am agreeing with her thought on humanity there. Yes, Dickinson, I think.
I just read that.
I think Dickinson, in part, the fact that she didn't have an audience the way contemporary artists do, that she was functioning in a dialectic that was between her and herself and maybe her neighbor, her sister-in-law or something, kept it in a very different space that's extremely unusual to have no public audience, really. To what extent it's by choice is not 100% clear to me, but regardless, it didn't inhibit her from working. So I think that is extremely meaningful right there, that, you know, people often, you know, when they think when it gets tough, the art gets too tough, or the audience gets is not what you want it to be, there are a lot of artists that just check out, you know. And Dickinson never checked out. She died, but she never checked out, you know. I relate to that because it gives the artist a certain freedom in their work, to take the time, to take the road that is that maybe isn't clear to them, to explore in a way that when you have an audience, and you know, particularly with the art market the way it is, you're in a very different world. You're basically in production land here. And you know, I have never, or I don't believe I've ever played to that audience, but it is a big influence. Certainly economically, it's the whole thing. So she was functioning at a time when the economy was irrelevant to art, or greatly irrelevant. So that was also a great advantage for anybody working during that period.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember Brenda Wineapple, who's a friend of mine, who wrote a fantastic book about Emily Dickinson called White Heat, which I recommend to everybody if you're interested in Dickinson. But you know, in fact, a lot of these poets in the 19th century had these big careers, and they were getting on a train to California to speak to admiring thousands of people. And it does, I mean, it seems almost like a lot of artists these days are like Iceland, that, you know, they start out isolated, and then if you find an audience, or the audience finds you get kind of sucked in there, because economically you have to survive. And there's this great piece in here that I just want to refer to, called Notes on the Obsolescence of Islands, which I love because it's kind of like there's no more islands anymore. I mean, I'm summing it up pretty briefly there, but it's true. I mean, I love this, or I don't love, but you say Zoloft and cocaine have been identified in the coastal waters of the most remote areas of the globe. So, I mean, what do you see your relationship to Iceland being in 10 or 20 years, with all this new weather, with all this new communication, with all this new changes and everything? Do you think that Iceland will be possible as an idea for people?
I'm not sure what you mean by that question, because certainly living there, the idea of islandhood has changed so radically, certainly through the digital age, but also, as you pointed out, chemically and economically. Economics is one of the biggest influences. When you have a globalization of the economy, you destroy the distinctions between things. And that for Iceland, you see Icelanders, native Icelanders, not to sound arrogant, but they used to grow up in a finite space that was hard to access. Okay, so let's just go back to the 70s, even in the 80s, you had this feeling that, okay, you had to make believe Iceland was the world, because you had, you didn't have that free access to everywhere else to get whatever you wanted to get. The digital age had not come in, so you didn't have this free communication or understanding of global current events and so on and so forth. You cannot imagine how different a place it is to be on an island that is mainlining current events from everywhere in the world, and taking not only medically, but the fourth-class drugs and the products that are coming from all over the world. You lose a sense of self-reliance very quickly and independence. So it's something that eats away from within as well as from without. So I do feel identity, yes, it changes very, very much. Will it exist in 20 years? Yes, it will exist. What will that particular version of Iceland look like? We'll see. I do feel like you're moving through phases of identity when you're in a culture like that, or in any culture.
Well, because especially in a place like Iceland, which is a relatively wealthy place that can afford to fend for itself on certain levels. Linguistically was one of those levels. And I just read that, in fact, a lot of Icelandic kids are not even that comfortable writing and speaking their own language because they watch so much stuff on their phones, basically. But do you think...
Yeah, I was going to say that probably is true, but I have to tell you, when I would spend time there, people spoke many languages fluently because, they only had 150,000 people to communicate with if they only spoke Icelandic. So there was a big motivation to learn other languages, when I first started going over there. The older generation only spoke Icelandic, but that, now is everybody speaking at least 2, if not 4 languages, the young people.
Do you speak any Icelandic?
Not really, no.
No, because you can get around.
Well,
Yeah. So,
what it looked like to get around when I was there didn't involve people. I could go for weeks without having social contact. So when my gas ran out,
Is that possible now?
Yeah, it is. You go to the highlands, the interior. It's a fragile situation. They haven't built a road through the highlands, which is basically a desert, but they are talking about it, and that will change the highlands. If they do that, you will have a lot of people going into the interior and a lot of infrastructure built to accommodate them.
Yeah, well, let's hope it lasts a little longer. It seems like no matter where you go now, I'm speaking to you from a part of France that until very recently was really, really isolated. And you feel it, you still feel that this was not a place where people would come unless they really had to. And now, of course, it's this tourist paradise, and everything. Not that there's tourists anymore. But,
you're in the south?
Sorry?
Are you in the south or?
Yeah, I'm in the southwest part of France, which it's kind of Appalachia, it's.
Are you?
It got
Yeah.
Sorry?
Are you near Spain? Or I'm just trying to figure out where you are.
Yeah, I'm in the Dordogne, which is sort of halfway between Toulouse and Bordeaux.
Gotcha.
And it was a rough place until probably the 70s, and then everything comes in, and now it's a big supermarket, and the internet sometimes works. We've got it all.
You really you feel how much smaller the planet is. I feel, there's nothing I do today that doesn't affect everybody in the world. That's how small it is.
So do you feel that COVID has changed that in the sense of is an Iceland more or less essential when you're already in this form of imposed isolation?
I'm not sure it's either. Iceland, of course I'd love to be in Iceland now just because of the humanity that's generally shared there, not to idealize it, but people do in these smaller communities, and now we're talking Iceland's only 300,000 people versus the times I've been there when it was only 150 or so. They're still really dealing with a level of respect, community respect, that I prefer to the one America is indulging in now. And a lot of countries, not just America.
Well, I just want to shout out to everybody in the audience and say that we're going to open it up now for questions. If people want to type into the Q&A box, we can ask a few. There's one question that's already up there. Ronnie, would you be able to tell us a little bit about the art on the wall behind you? And I think I know what that art is, so tell us. Really?
Do you? Yes, I would be happy to. I'm just trying to, okay, I see what you're seeing.
Yeah, okay. That was in the Times, right?
Yeah, this is a kind of mock-up of a very large work called Log, which is 406 sheets. I call them sheets, meaning each day I would work I would commit to produce something in that format, which is a piece of writing paper. Each sheet is the size of a piece of writing paper, and it took the form of writing, casual observation, photographs, facts, quotations, drawings, whatever it is I was up to that day or snagged me, my interest is on that wall. The full title is Log, March 22nd to May 17th, 2020, excuse me. So it's about 14 months worth of daily interaction, and during that period, the quarantine came into the pandemic was declared. So I went from this voluntary isolation to involuntary isolation. The difference isn't very visible, but psychologically, it's very much there. And that there is.
How would you define it?
Define it? Well, voluntary isolation is something that I enjoy and is a natural state for me. Involuntary isolation is focused more on what I can't do because I can't, move around the way because when you're in voluntary isolation, there are no restrictions at all. You're just not hanging out in a social setting, When you're in involuntary isolation, you can hang out in a social setting and you can't move about. So that's the difference. It's a cycle.
But what's the difference in the work? What's the difference that you feel in the?
I wouldn't say there's a difference in the work. I mean, this work was being done well before the pandemic set in. I mean, the fact that I wanted a daily relationship with something was kind of an antidote to this work of mine, which goes on, the production cycles are 2 or 3 years, or they're overarching conceptual works photographically, like the stuff I did out of Iceland would take years to collect the material, which eventually became a photo installation or something like this, you see. So this was a daily kind of feedback loop that every day I could move on and yet maintain continuity.
Now, here's a question, another audience question that I think is interesting because of your relationship between visual art and writing, and specifically in Island Zombie. Someone says, can you talk about your approach to publication? So what is the book format for you? I mean, that's a pretty big question, but you know, it says the difference between a record, an exhibition, an archive, or do you think of it as its own work? Like Rings of Lispector is a book and it's also a show.
Yeah, I guess there are books and there are books. You know, there are artist books, which would be Another Water. It would be Weather Reports You, 82 Postcards. These are conceptual works that I developed like any other work that I do, sculpture, drawing, writing. So that's one thing. And then there are books that I've done which are basically documenting my work in a way that tries to share with the viewer the experiential aspect of the work. You know, it's not just an illustration of the work, it's designed in a way that helps the viewer step into the work, a greater intimacy with the work. Now, the book, what's beautiful about the book, or what used to be, was that it was distributed potentially anywhere in the world. So that appealed to me in a way that none of my other work could possibly be distributed like that. So that's why these works, books, not so much the artist books, but and they're not really catalogs, but they're presentations of the work in a way that's to be distributed. The work itself is often, you know, if you don't have the opportunity to see it as in an exhibition, which, you know, really it's quite rare. Some of the works that I've done, like most artists, they only get shown a few times, you know, in random places, you know. So it's a little bit like the space between that experiential and that and digital, where you lose any chance really to have the experiential. So it's, with a book you still have certain qualities. You have sequence, for example, and you have a relationship to time that the book has uniquely, that I love to play with the so-called catalogs. You know.
Here's another question.
Yeah.
The question is, I'm not aware of many other works that have Iceland as their touchstone, but Chris Marker's film Sans Soleil comes to mind. Are you aware of that film? Has it been an influence at all? Any recommendations for other work that takes Iceland as its subject or inspiration?
Interesting question. Chris Marker is definitely somebody I've enjoyed spending time with his work. I wouldn't say that his film was, I don't think I knew it until, you know, I was 20 years into Iceland, but it makes sense to me, let's say that. Yeah, I would suggest, interestingly, I've always enjoyed the writings of Halldór Laxness. And particularly there's one called Independent People. If you want to know Iceland, because half of it's just the weather, man. It's just trying to take care of yourself in inclement weather. That's half the book. If you find that exciting, this is the book for you.
What about Auden? I kept thinking about Letters from Iceland or Letters to Iceland when I was reading this. I mean, Iceland has attracted its hardcore. You know, people get into it.
There's William Morris.
Sorry?
William Morris, before Auden. William Morris took a horse around and he wrote letters. He had a diary that was published that he had kept in Iceland, which I was able to take some of that information into my writings. His observations about the geology of Iceland, how much it's changed. In other words, a given place that he spoke about is quite visibly different when I went through. And that was a fascinating thing to experience. Auden and McNeice, of course, Auden, it's a bit of a litany of complaint in there, but, and well-founded, because, Iceland, when he was going there, certainly, which I think it was more like, was it the 60s? I'm not sure. Or maybe earlier even.
I think it was earlier, but I'm not sure. I don't know in that book.
But it was a very austere place. Like me, I'm going there in the 70s. Okay, where do I stay? In the summertime, first of all, there was no tourist industry. So I wound up finding these places which were schools during the year. They were boarding schools. And they would rent you, a broom closet or whatever for the night. And what was really great were they all had swimming pools. Because Iceland, they swim. They teach kids to swim. So all of these boarding schools have indoor swimming pools. So it's
one of my favorite things in your book is all the places you go swimming.
Yeah.
And it's really, it makes me want to go there immediately and go to you say there's this one pool, 3 sides are concrete, the other side is a mountain.
And actually,
let me try to get through a couple more questions.
Sure.
Because there's some good questions in here. Here's one someone says, that speaks to the title of the book, Island Zombie. You once said islands are a thing of the past, and today we've heard of island obsolescence, which is a great phrase. But how does zombie fit in?
Yeah, good question. In the sense of being possessed by something, and the way Iceland, the influence it had on me, and the question of how so-called insentient things can come to be so present in my being, and so meaningful to me, and guiding me in so many ways, and informing me. And so there's a part of me that feels, little zombie. Yeah, there's a zombie in me, an Icelandic zombie. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Let's see.
There was a risk at using that word because I know most people think of zombie as, you immediately see the blood and gore, but that's a more contemporary use of the imagery of zombies. But I was thinking more of the spiritual possession, of being spiritually possessed.
Well, when I went to a place that I got sort of obsessed with for a while, which was Haiti. I wonder if you've ever been there. That really does. That's also an island in a lot of ways. But you have been there?
No, I haven't. But I did see I Walked with a Zombie. Do you ever see that? Which has the essence of Haiti in it. Oh, you have to see this.
Yeah. Well, it feels very real when Haitians often talk about the process of that, you would call it possession or something maybe in Catholicism. But it's real. There are places that do that to you. And there's places that you can go that can be really interesting and pretty and whatever. And you're just like, you just don't feel it.
In that book called Something Adhesive, I think it's called Something Adhesive. It's about this area in Iceland, which is known to have spiritual qualities that are unique. And, some people think it's a new agey thing and all of that, but it is something a bit deeper or different than that, I think. Certain places have energy. In Iceland, when I was staying in a tent and traveling, there were definitely locations I thought, didn't like the energy, didn't want to spend the night. It wasn't the potential for violence or anything like that. It was just a discomfort, it just didn't feel right. And that happened a lot in Iceland. And instead of questioning it, I went with it, and indeed, Icelanders, there are places that I was thinking to spend the evening, but unable because I didn't feel comfortable. After telling friends of that experience and the locations, some of those locations they considered haunted, which could mean something bad happened there, or there is just an energy that's stopped up in that area that is not easy to be around, you know.
Well, I think we've all felt that, we felt that, but our rational brains kind of tell us, oh, I'm sure this is fine. There's nobody here. Like, what's the issue? And then you do it anyway, and then something bad can happen. So I think let's wrap up with one more question that I think is a nice place to kind of end on here. The question is, when you go back to Iceland, what's the first place you'll return to?
This next time that I go, well, good question. I probably would go, I don't know if I should be telling you this. It's going to lose its appeal. But I tend to go to the places where there's little or no infrastructure. So nobody else, I'll know that very few people will go there. So those tend to be the south, east of Iceland and northwest. So that's where I would go. That would, when I hit the road, that's where I would go.
And do you still travel by motorcycle?
No. The motorcycle was a one-off, and I do not identify as a motorcyclist. I did it because it was the cheapest way for me to be in Iceland for 6 months. I went on a grant, okay? I had no money. I just got out of graduate school, and I was given, as I recall, it was around $3,000. So half of it, I bought the motorcycle. And then I shipped it over to Iceland. So we're going back to 1979, 6 months on that dirt bike. What I planned was, I knew the roads weren't paved. And I knew that the cost of gas was very, very high. So this was really a practical solution to my problem. And it also gave me access to places a lot of cars can't go, or not the cars that the typical cars, which were not four-wheel drive and they were not Jeeps. So you couldn't get there really any other way other than by horseback, which is probably another way to get to know Iceland. So that was it. And when I was finished with that, I kind of, I lost the connection to, dirt bikes and motorcycles. Just that one.
Have you ever traveled by horse?
I've traveled by horse, not great distances, but I've definitely enjoyed some time on horseback in Iceland. I would want to do more, actually. You asked the question. It definitely appeals to me.
Yeah.
You want to go to the highway, way to go.
Let me just show the book one more time. Island Zombie, Iceland Writing, Ronnie Horn. I guess you all know it by now, but it's really a special book. As I said at the very beginning, I'm kind of jealous of this book, Ronnie. I think it's like, I don't know how I would write something like that, but I'd want to. And when I read it, I feel a kind of, someone said about Susan Sontag that wherever she was, the walls seemed to expand. Wow. And that's kind of how I felt. You expanded the walls for me at a time when I've been really isolated and kind of weird, and locked up like everybody else. So thanks so much. And I really hope someday we'll get to see each other in actual living flesh. Maybe another 20 years, but it'll happen, I'm sure.
Excellent, Benjamin. Really enjoyed talking with you and your thoughts. Thank you.
Same here. Thanks so much to everybody.
Well, and let me hop on. I'm Josh Human. I'm the Curator of Education and Public Programs at the Power Plant. I am so incredibly thankful to both Ronnie Horn and Benjamin Moser for such an amazing conversation. There are so many wonderful questions. I wish that we could get to each and every one of them. But as they say, there will be more conversations. And so hopefully some of those questions will be addressed in future conversations. Ronnie can't share all the knowledge right now in this one conversation. Thank you again to our co-presenters at TIFA. Thank you to Roland Gulliver and his colleagues. This conversation has been recorded. It will end up online, so do check out the Power Plants and the Toronto International Festival of Authors websites and social media for word of that. Thepowerplant.org and festivalofauthors.ca. And I just have to close with one short line that comes out of my copy of Island Zombie that really, I think, sets the tone for everything else that I read in it. Ronnie writes, "I returned to Iceland with migratory insistence and regularity. The necessity of it was part of me. Iceland was the only place I went without cause, just to be there." On that note, thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. We will see you at our next program.